Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning and good afternoon to our distinguished panelists and participants in different time zones. I am Nabila Jafar. I'm research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies. On behalf of the Institute of Regional Studies and Middle East Political and Economic Institute, I welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us. We have arranged this webinar today on China's deepening ties with the Middle East. To begin formally, first of all, I would like to invite the president of the Institute of Regional Studies for the opening remarks, and then Dr. Flavius Kaba Maria, who is president of the Middle East Political and Economic Institute. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Nabila. Good morning, everyone. And it's really a pleasure being here and seeing so many people on this first webinar, which we are jointly organizing, the Institute of Regional Studies and the Middle East Political and Economic Institute. The story goes like this, that after a very brief period of exchange of information, we signed a MOU on the 14th of March this year. And this is the first event which we are holding together on a topic which is of great interest to both people in Europe as well as, I think, around the world, and especially in our part of the world, which is China's deepening relations with the Middle East. What we have done is that we will be having 3 speakers, 3 from Romania and 3 from Pakistan, talking about the important subject which we have on our hands today. And the speakers will be talking about the 5 sub-themes, which are the geopolitical interests, multilateralism, connectivity under the BRI, global development initiative and global security initiative, and energy cooperation. China's interest in the Middle East has been in energy, but lately we have seen that this particular interest has gone beyond that, and China has been instrumental in brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They were able to break that period between the 2 countries where there were virtually no diplomatic relations. So obviously, like, when China involves itself in the Middle East, it will have an effect not only on the Middle East, but also on our part of the world. And also, I think whatever happens in that area will also have a global effect. We have today a team of experts, 3 from Romania, 3 from Pakistan. They're all experts in their field. And I keenly look forward to listening to all of them at this event, which I am sure will lead to further events between us and the MEPEI. Thank you very much. Over from my side. Over to you, Nabila.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite Dr. Flavius Kaba Maria, who is president of the Middle East Political and Economic Institute, to give his opening remarks.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I would like firstly to express my gratitude to our partner, Institute of Regional Studies, especially Ambassador, the President of the Institute, in co-organizer our first bilateral talks after signing the MOU a few weeks ago. This webinar is the first of the part of a series of talks established between us. We decided to focus firstly on one of the most important themes that are currently is in international relations. That means China strengthening ties with the Middle East. It may seem surprising that a region in such a turmoil as the Middle East and not bordering with China holds such importance to Chinese leaders. But over the past 4 decades, the Middle East has risen to prominence among the leadership cycle in Beijing. Since 2000, the Middle East has been considered an extension of China's periphery with key ethno-religious linkage and threatening its domestic stability. Since 2010, there is an emerging realization in Beijing of the Middle East considerable geostrategic importance to China. Moreover, since 2013, under Xi Jinping presidency through his foreign policy instrument, Belt and Road Initiative, China has been engaged in its own rebalance policy, which precedes President Obama rebalance to the Asia Pacific. China is still a relative newcomer to the region and is extremely cautious in its approach to the local political and security challenges. China has been focused to increase its engagement with the Middle East, given its growing economic presence there, the significance of trade, its equivalent important to the Middle East states. Many policymakers have little knowledge of China's position and objectives in the Middle East, or of the ways in which this factor could affect regional stability and political dynamics in the medium and long term. Our discussion today, it's very timely that since 2001, Saudi Arabia and Iran have become the twin pillar of Chinese approaches to the Persian Gulf region. President Xi Jinping initiative, China hosted and sponsored talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Chinese president was therefore able to act as a trusted broker between them. With this agreement, China moves to the next level engagement in the Middle East. The Saudi-Iranian tension have been appeased through dialogue and diplomacy, taking into account their brotherly regional ties. By mediating the Saudi-Iranian normalization agreement, China is turning into new territory, expanding its regional footprint from economic exchange to negotiation conflict resolution. So related to the speakers, president of Institute of Regional Study already presented them, and I would like to say the topics that you choose today is to analyze as much as possible deeply China engaging the Middle East. Thank you very much, and I wish you very successful and fruitful discussion and debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flavius. As President IRS mentioned that today we will cover 5 sub-themes, and in these sub-themes we will cover our first topic is geopolitical interests. For this, our first speaker is Dr. Rashid Ahmed Khan. Dr. Rashid Ahmed Khan is a former professor and chairman at the Department of Political Science, University of Punjab, Lahore. And he has still recently worked as a founder and chairman and professor of the Department of International Relations, University of Central Punjab, Lahore. And prior to that, he had position at University of Sargodha as a professor. And Dr. Khan authored 2 books, Pakistan and Arab-Israel Conflict, and Perspectives on Current Affairs, Progressive Publishers. He has also authored a research monograph, Scrambled for the Indian Ocean, Progressive Publishers, Lahore. With this brief introduction, I would like to give the mic to the Professor Rashid Ahmed Khan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Nabila, for your kind words. First of all, I will express my deep gratitude to the Institute of Regional Affairs, Islamabad, for inviting me to this event, which proposes to discuss a very important, rather explosive issue of China's future role in the Middle East. Well, I will start my presentation with a well-known historical fact about the Middle East, and that is that the right from the ancient Persian Empire, which was the first and the largest superpower in human history, to the present, that is the American Empire in the Middle East, no empire had been complete without having the Middle East, and especially the territories on the eastern coast of Mediterranean, from Turkey, passing through Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and up to North Africa as its part. Reasons are obvious. The same strategic imperatives and factors are at play, are playing their part when we are going to discuss the role of China after many centuries. But of course, I must make it clear that I don't mean by it that China, there is going to be another empire in the Middle East, to be known as Chinese Empire. Time has changed, characters have changed, circumstances have changed, the policies have changed. China presents a new paradigm in the Middle East that we will speak about later. First of all, it has been said that China is a newcomer to the Middle East. I partly agree with it only because Middle East is not new to China. China had been engaged with the Middle East for about 1500 years, till 1453, when the Ottoman Empire closed the Mediterranean to the trade between Europe and China. And the period of disengagement between China and the Middle East began only with the rise of European colonialism, with the arrival of Vasco da Gama in 1498 at the western coast of India, heralding a European era in South Asia and the Middle East. And the whole pattern of trade connections, the whole pattern changed, and the Western countries reoriented the trade and connectivity pattern amongst the countries of Central Asia, Middle East, West Asia, and China changed, and it remained in force for about 500 years, till more than 500 years. During this period, of course, China remained slightly disengaged with the Middle East because Middle East became the sphere of influence of colonial power, first through commercial diplomacy, then through political diplomacy. They occupied Egypt. And why? Because we know that Middle East still serves, and it has served as a very protective shield to the NATO, being the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, just as the western coast of Europe is very important relevant for the national security interests of the United States. In the same way, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, constituting the territories which I have mentioned, they constitute as an eastern flank for NATO. Therefore, Middle East is still relevant and important for the defense and security of Europe, and it will remain so for a long time, as long as the American empire sustains, or American power recedes. Okay. China has chosen to, as we see that after 1949, after the establishment of People's Republic of China, the areas with which China declared to establish relations immediately after the independence also included the Middle East. And in 1950s and 60s, China, in one way or other, directly or indirectly, remained related to the issues of the Middle East. China, for example, extended wholehearted support to Arab nationalism in the 1950s and 1960s. And when China became a member of the UN Security Council, we know that China played a very important part in the issues in the Middle East. Current role of China in the Middle East is based, it's a result of a process of evolution which started about 2 decades ago. During the last 2 decades, Chinese have built up a base largely with the trade, economic interests. But now they have moved to play a political role. And for this, they have selected the Gulf. And more rather, Iran. Now, it is because of Iran's geostrategic location. we can recall that all the three major arteries of the famous Silk Road or Silk routes passed through Iran before converging on the eastern coast of Mediterranean. Therefore, Iran had always been strategically very important for spreading influence towards the Middle East, towards Central Asia, towards the Gulf, up to eastern coast of Africa. So that is what that gives, that explains, or I would say that adds significance to the Chinese role in the in arranging a reconciliation or an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, because China's interests, Jewish political interests, stem from or based on the geographical location of Iran, as I said. From Iran, although Saudi Arabia is a much larger supplier of oil to China as compared to Iran, but Chinese geostrategic interests in the Middle East go much beyond oil. They relate to, in my view, I strongly believe that what China aims in a long-term perspective is to restore the ancient Silk Road pattern of trade, economic cooperation, regional connectivity. And for this, Iran can play a very important role in two directions. That is to say, China can realize its desire of expanding its influence in the Middle East in 2 or 3 directions from Iran. Number one is that China can have an access to the Caspian region, which hosts the second largest reserves of oil and gas. And that is important for China in order to be independent, or in order to remove to decrease or to remove its dependence on the Indian Ocean. Because at present we all know that bulk of Chinese energy, oil and gas, that is shipped from the Middle East and Persian Gulf through the Indian Ocean, through the Malacca Straits to China. Malacca Straits is a choke point. It's one of the 3 choke points in the Indian Ocean, which together with the Hormuz Straits, Bab al-Mandeb, and then Malacca Straits, and China feels vulnerable. And it is not the recent idea with the Chinese that they start to think about decreasing their dependence on the Indian Ocean and having some alternative ways to sustain the import of energy to China, especially to Western China. In 2003, for the first time, Chinese government began to think about it and talked about it, because of in terms of the fact that Malacca Straits was being controlled by what China called hostile powers. Those hostile powers have become more active these days. We all know that Malabar exercises are being held in the waters close to Malacca Straits. US and India have developed very close relations, defense and security relations. And to cap all that, during the Himalayan standoff between China and India, 2 or 3 years ago, a former chief of the Indian Army's staff had threatened that in case China embarks upon any large-scale military operation against the Indian forces in the Himalayan region, the conflict will not remain confined to Himalaya, it will expand. And implicitly, he threatened to block the Malacca Straits to the Chinese goods passing through. And that prompted the Chinese, in one way, to be calm and quiet. In other ways, resilient and peaceful in discussing the tension and conflict in the Himalayan state. Second important direction in which the Chinese are looking for expanding, for establishing their influence is on the Middle East, in the North Africa through Egypt. And for that, China has already built a railway line from Tehran to Iraqi border. And in Iraq and in Jordan and Palestine, if Chinese succeed in establishing their influence and presence in this part of the Middle East, it will be very easy for them to penetrate into North Africa through Egypt and Libya. China has already invested heavily in Iraq and Syria. It's not only Iran and Saudi Arabia with which the Chinese have built up a very strong, robust economic relationship. There are other countries of the Middle East with which China is trying to build close relations in the economic areas. Thirdly, Iran, as we all know, controls the coastline of the Persian. It dominates the Persian Gulf. It controls the Hormuz Straits. And we should remember that this was a part of the Indian Ocean, where the first European country to land in South Asia, that is the Portuguese, under their brilliant admiral, Albuquerque, built up a strategy which is still relevant and valid today. That is, what was that strategy? To control the whole Indian Ocean region by occupying 3 points in the Indian Ocean area. One in the northwestern area of the Indian Ocean, and the Portuguese occupied an island known as Scotra, built a military base there in order to control the Hormuz Straits, in order to control the entry into the Indian Ocean from the Red Sea. And then the Portuguese also occupied Sri Lanka. At that time, it was known as Ceylon, and then Malacca Straits. It was this strategy which enabled the Portuguese empire to sustain for a number of years, in spite of the fact that Portugal was a very small European country. And it was a strategy which was inherited by the British. And it was a strategy upon which the British were not only able to stop the advance of the Japanese forces during the Second World War towards the Middle East, where they wanted to have a meeting with the German forces advancing in North Africa under the command of famous German General Rommel, and saved not only Indian Ocean, saved not only India but also the Middle East and Russia. Otherwise, it would had the Japanese succeeded in reaching the Mozambique and are in reaching the Persian Gulf through the Indian Ocean, the fate of the Second World War would have been different. And it was also the strategy which turned Indian Ocean into British Lake. I believe that this strategy is still valid and it is being practiced. I can refer to Malabar naval exercises, concentration. Rather, I think the largest concentration of military forces in the history of the area by the Americans in the Persian Gulf and in waters around the Persian Gulf. And these are these strategic features of these areas which can be controlled which can be which I would not say manipulated. I would say that which can be used by China with their foothold in Iran. And so the main strategic interest of China at present is to perpetuate its relationship with Iran, with the there are
Dr. Rashid, may I request you to conclude your presentation?
Okay.
We are already ahead of time.
okay.
Yeah.
So these I think from Iran, Chinese immediate I mean by making Iran as a springboard, China is aiming to have an access into the oil reserves of Caspian era in order to complement its supply of oil from the Central Asia, and in order to reduce its dependence on the Indian Ocean, and also to take advantage of the market and the resources of West African countries. And then not only that, in the third direction, China can also have an access to eastern coast of Africa, which forms the western wall of the Indian Ocean. But the main purpose of the main strategic goal of China is to reduce its dependence upon the Indian Ocean for the supply of energy and raw materials, because India has threatened to block the Indian Ocean for China, which China cannot afford. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very fruitful insights, Dr. Sab. Before moving to our second speaker, I would like to announce that each speaker has 10 to 15 minutes to present their point of views. Now I would like to move to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Dr. Adrian Severin, who is a Romanian politician and former member of the European Parliament. He is professor of international commercial law, T2 Mărescu University, Bucharest, member of the advisory panel of the Eurobarometer Network of European Institute for the Study of Inter-ethnic Relations. He is also president of International Court of Commercial Arbitration attached to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Romania. With this very brief introduction, I would like to give hand over the mic to Professor Adrian Severin. He will be speaking on Global Development Initiative.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank you for inviting me to join this event and to allowing me to share with you some of my views concerning the topic you have proposed for the debate today. I'm particularly happy to meet representatives of the schools of thought in Pakistan. And I think that Pakistan is one of the major players within this Asia's century, which we are contemplating. And certainly we have to be very careful to listen the voice of Pakistan, the voice of Pakistani scholars, the voice of Pakistani business people, of course, the voice of Pakistani politicians. I hope that this meeting is somehow, one of the steps towards more and more contacts and exchanges of views. To touch now, to enter the topic, I would think that we cannot speak about China, China's initiatives and so on, without looking a little bit to the history and to the global context. We cannot speak about the Middle East without looking to the context, to the global context, and of course to the history, as the other speaker before me also touched the issue. During the last few centuries, the history has noticed the dominance of Europe, followed by those of the United States in the global order. In fact, the global order was defined and dominated by the Europeans, mostly by the Western Europeans, I would say by the imperial nations of Western Europe, and most recently by the United States. The world order, the present order, or if you want, the most recent world order, is known under the name of Pax Americana. Now, Pax Americana was a system of unipolar power and consequently of asymmetric powers at the global level, which was supported by three pillars: the supremacy of the American military power, number one; number two, the unity and the universalisms of the human rights, generally speaking, of the way in which the society should be organized. I repeat, this system was considered, the human rights, a set of human rights were considered to be unique and universal. And number three, the freedom of trade within being clear that the American economy was the most competitive economy of the world. So, which is to say, the economy which was the most favored by the freedom of exchange. So the freedom of trade was indeed a progress, but a progress which served best the most developed economy, the most competitive economy, which was the American economy. Within this context, which had the merit, however, to eliminate the old colonial European system, the colonial system practiced by the imperial European nations, as well as under the umbrella of the Cold War between the capitalist bloc and the communist bloc. So within this context, the merit of this context was that the peoples in Asia, first and foremost, but also in Africa and Latin America, in spite of the foreign domination, in spite of the Euro-Atlantic external domination, were able to emancipate until the point in which some of them, and especially China, are considered to be the strategic rivals of the United States, and certainly the strategic rivals of the former colonial European powers. And these countries, and especially China, are the emergent global powers, if you want, global superpowers, which asks for the replacement of the old American order with a new post-American order. The most important conflict, the most important controversy at the present moment at the global level is the one between the American order and the post-American order. United States apparently are ready to sacrifice everything, in order to keep the old unipolar order. The question is, does United States have the resources and the power to come victorious from this conflict? Now, as a leader of the Euro-Atlantic world, as a supreme guardian and the absolute guarantor of the Pax Americana, United States is confronted at home and in the world with a complex of crises, namely the crisis of democracy, the democracy of American nature, the crisis of neoliberal capitalism, the crisis of neoconservative capitalism, and the crisis of the international law. In other words, the crisis of the international relations based on rules, as some American representatives called it. The bad management of this crisis led to the emergence of some other crisis for the United States: the crisis of credibility, the crisis of legitimacy, the crisis of authority, and eventually the crisis of leadership, the crisis which is manifest in the various turbulence within the American decision-making process. Well, all these crises explain the popular upheaval, the popular riots, which are now to be seen all over the Euro-Atlantic world, in United States and in the main European countries. And they are also the explanation for the World War, in which are used classical means as well as hybrid means, economic means, cultural means, other nature means. The main front, the main battlefield at this very moment, within this global war, because we are speaking about a global war, is in the Black Sea and in Ukraine. In a certain extent, we can speak about another important front, and this one is in the China Sea. And to a certain extent, we see preparation for a great battle in the Indo-Pacific area in a broader sense. The implication of United States and its allies, for the time being, with different intensities on these fronts, on these battlefiels, made it had the consequence, which we might see it as a positive consequence, to decrease the presence and the pressure of Euro-Atlantic powers in the Middle East. So letting the Middle Eastern countries the possibility to move more independently, to make choices more in accordance with their interest, their national interest, and to see which are the alternatives they could choose, amongst which they could choose and they could support. Theoretically speaking, and if we look to the historical precedents, United States could come out of this crisis either through war or through economic integration at the global level. If United States would win the war, certainly the unipolarism will prevail. The economic integration at the global level would mean the acceptance of the multilateralism. For the time being, it seems to me that United States adopted the first solution, which means the war, the overcoming of the complex crisis which I described by the war. These options, however, ignores the fact that within present power balance, within the present balance of power at the global level, the United States could not possibly win the war. They could win maybe some local wars, but not the global war. And they could win even the local wars only from the military point of view, without being able to impose the... Yes. So one could win the wars, but they could not win the peace. This is a problem. At the same time, United States became dependent from the economic point of view on the resources, labor, and the emerging markets within the rest of the world, especially from Asia. From this context, on the first place, we can put China. And China, as well as some other states, in respect of that markets and respect of those resources, unfortunately, I would say, the United States are on the verge to also to lose the race of scientific development and research and the technological progress. The isolation of China, for the time being only through economic sanction, is in fact a form of self-isolation, which would undermine the chances of the United States to solve its own internal economic problems and to reduce the level of poverty which is there. Within this context, the beginning of some trade exchanges which are paid in other currencies than the dollar, namely in the yuans, as well as the transactions of oil in other currency than in dollars, would de-dollarize the global economy and will give a terrible blow to the American economy. So within this, or against this background, the rise of China as a global power is to be seen and to be valued. This doesn't mean the end of globalization, but the replace of the unipolar globalization with a multipolar globalization within which peace will be or could be assured not by the military might, which is the might of the global gendarme, but by the balance of the different poles, the balance which will be achieved through the balanced economic development. So now, if this is a background, which could be the Chinese alternative as a emerging superpower? This is an important question. So we have an American alternative, which is the old global order with its problems, and now which could be the Chinese alternative. China is, at least for the time being, at least as I could see it, and at least as I could desire it, as a soft superpower. But a soft superpower doesn't mean a tasteless superpower, but a power which, unlike the hard superpower, promote peace through development, development through common projects through solidarity of interests, solidarity of interest through the respect of diversity, and the respect of diversity through the ideologization of the international relations. The policy of such a power is essentially economically and socially oriented, so to say, demilitarized. The military solution is there as well, but it is the last recourse solution and a subsidiary solution, not the first solution. Unlike United States, China is an Asian power, and therefore it is one of the people forming one of the peoples forming an Asian culture. So they could understand better the Asian culture mentality, even if, of course, there are Arabic countries, non-Arabic countries, and some other kind of cultures and historical backgrounds. But nevertheless, it is an Asian spirit which linked all these countries. And while America is coming from a completely different culture and history, China is there. China shares, and I think this is very important, with the other Asian peoples, the feeling of humiliation generated by the European and American domination from the past centuries. So from this point of view, the desire of dignity is as big in China, national dignity is as big in China as it is in Pakistan or in other countries from Asia and certainly from Middle East. Unlike United States, which linked its security from investments to investments in the military industrial complex, China tried to emancipate through investment, durable investment, sustainable investment in the economic field. Therefore, its project of world order, it's basically it's economic, it's of an economic nature and not of a military nature. Even during the last years, while United States spent a lot of money in order to increase its military might, China spent a lot of money mostly to develop its research, its academic sector, and certainly the economy. This being said, under from the geopolitical perspective, China is a supporter of the status quo. And this, to my mind, is very important for all countries in Middle East, because I believe that all Middle Eastern countries are interested in keeping, in defending, in preserving the status quo, the geopolitical status quo. On the other hand, China doesn't come to the Middle East with guarantees of military security, but on the other hand, it offers guarantees of economic security. And what it is extremely important is that China does not want to export ideologies in the Middle East, and China does not want to raise or to political conditions in order to involve itself in the economic development. And I believe that this could appear as an opportunity to facilitate the overcoming of the chronic conflicts between the states in the Middle East. And this is extremely important. It's a country which, being interested in the status quo and promoting a non-military approach of the global policy, it could indeed facilitate the overcoming of the Middle Eastern conflicts. The consolidation of peace through development is conceived by China through its regional initiative and global initiative, which implies the achievement of huge interconnection infrastructural projects as the Road and Belt Initiative. Of course, the success of such project, it's dependent on the involvement of all countries in the region. This could not be achieved by China alone. I would go quickly towards the end of my presentation by mentioning some other 2 points. Now, very briefly. Number one, what I have described to a certain extent is a process in march. So we cannot guarantee that this will be the outcome. It's what we can foresee as being as an outcome, and it is something which we could desire to be the outcome. Which are the dangers of which are indeed be able to undermine the march towards this end which I have described. And I think that the most important danger today is the escalation of the China-American conflict. And why do I say that? Because by putting military pressure and political pressure and even economic pressure on China, trying to antagonize and isolate China, this could lead to a change in the Chinese political approach. This could transform a basically economic-oriented country towards a military-oriented country. And certainly nobody desires to see in Asia and in the world a new military, super military power. Certainly, China is entitled to develop its military power in order to face the various military challenges. But China should remain rooted in its mentality of non-expansionist, non-military, soft power, socially and economically oriented. So I see that this policy of squeezing, if I may say so, China with military means would oblige China to respond in the same way. So it's not compulsory to opt for such a response, but it is very possible. And if this is the case, then I am afraid that we are going to see new policies, global geopolitical approaches, in conflict, rather than 2 alternatives for one multipolar and the other one unipolar order. So, and last point would be, I want this just to draw your attention about this danger. And from that observation, it comes my last point. What could the Middle East countries do in order to avoid this danger? And I think that first and foremost, the middle countries should see their future within the new multipolar order and conceive their own position and policies in such a way as to support the emergence of a multipolar order. I think that the Middle Eastern countries, those who have, some of them have, Pakistan, I think they have some traditional relations, communication in the United States, but not only Pakistan, some others. They could indeed warn the United States that their policies are wrong, not only in respect of the interest of the Middle Eastern countries, but in respect of the interest of the United States itself. The policy which is meant to privilege the might, this policy is going to blow up in the face of the United States. And this is indeed something which at least the France or all the partners of United States in the Middle East should tell frankly to the American players. And finally, I think that indeed the Middle Eastern countries should take these opportunities in order to support the global development plans which are initiated by China, to taking the advantage of the relation, as I said, with the United States in order to bring it to the common sense and to indeed try to identify and redefine their national interest within a global context and within the regional context in order to be able to support the strategy of the solidarity of interest and of the common projects. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Professor Adrian Severin. Let me mention that it is a privilege to benefit from the views of Professor Adrian, as he has served in the European Parliament. He was a deputy prime minister for reforms, and he was also he had been a former foreign minister of Romania. You mentioned that peace will be assured not by military might, but the balance of different poles. We really feel educated by your views. Now I would like to move to our third distinguished speaker. Our third speaker is Ambassador Theodor Viral Melenskeno. He holds a PhD in political science and international law from the University of Geneva. He is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of National Defense, and he served as Director of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Romania between 2012 and 2014. And he was a three-time senator on behalf of the National Liberal Party, and he was also former head and former member of the Romanian delegation at specialized agencies of the United Nations, OSCE, European Council, NATO, and UAE, and regional organization. He is professor at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Bucharest, Department of International Relations, and he has published series of papers and scientific publications on international law and diplomacy. With this introduction, I would like to hand over the mic to Professor Theodor. He will be speaking and he will share his remarks on multilateralism.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really very happy to attend this meeting, not only because Mr. Severin is there, but also our friends from Pakistan and other countries. And I think what I want to do today, a short problem, yes, looking at these ideas, what I wanted to say is that what we need at this time, okay, we need a fundamental restructuring of the international system. I believe that we are currently living, of course, in a troubled period, unprecedented in the history. Between different countries, they say they want to avoid war, and yet it is very close, and their eyes refuse to see it from us. The world today feels a kind of need that takes precedence over all others. There are 2 points: order in thinking and consciousness. If this order is not quickly re-established, everything that is done will be useless, and humanity will fall further into the problems of pandemics, food crisis, electricity and gas, problems of environmental destruction. People are waiting in the current circumstances for a solution to their problems. The reorganization of the world economy is underway in order to survive. Not only big business, but entire nations are adapting their development models. Important banks from United States and also from Switzerland and others are in a big difficulty. After the unipolar moment, the major and minor powers are competing for the best positions in the new world order. China, of course, is emerging and including for gold accumulations to take over the dollar's exchange rate. Europe will have to emerge as a more resilient, special, and diversified global economy, but also need new partners on equal footing between democracies and autocracies. Asia is becoming increasingly important, and European is not only China only, but all the countries from Asia. And Europeans need to take a new approach to European Union relations. Fundamental restructuring of the international system is absolutely necessary. Modernization and decades of liberal economics have created a very dense web of multiple links and interdependencies between states, links that can only be abandoned at an enormous cost. The future international system will be a multipolar system, 1 and 3 centers of powers, also like United States, China, and Russia. They aim to propose an alternative model, a multipolar model system, and in the same time, they aim to expand their influence in the existing system. At the last BRICS summit, expansion was discussed also about including Argentina, Iran, Saudi Arabia, which have already applied for membership on BRICS in our system. From my point of view, the most important problem is to use the pillar of the security in the world. It's the United Nations. And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently presented our common agenda, which includes proposals for a stronger, more connected, and inclusive multilateral system anchored in the United Nations framework. The Secretary General will also host a summit. It will be in September 2024, which aims to build a new global consensus on the future of the world order. The latest United Nations Development Report notes that cascading and intersecting crises and growing inequalities are putting the Sustainable Development Goals at a very big risk. During this period, we have also the conflict of Ukraine. I have to understand very clearly that China is one of the countries which came with very important proposals for finding finally of this war. It is currently difficult to understand that Ukraine and Russia will not remain for all in wars. More or less, at a certain moment, this problems will be solved. Both Turkey and China and other countries have offered to mediate the conflict in Ukraine, but other personalities have also tried to come up with proposals. Recently, by the way, China has put forward the position for a political solution to the crisis in Ukraine, which was presented from the point of view of Russia and from Ukraine. Unfortunately, the Europe in 2030 idea is back to a kind of Cold War with common interests and common values. In 2015, these ideas were discussed in Europe and the United States. The conclusion was what a common scenario will provide solutions by 2030. Fundamentally, economic exchanges have led to prosperity in Europe as a whole, but the European Union and Eastern Partnership has encouraged and interested countries to develop economically and socially, establishing the direct relations between the European Union and Russia and Asia. An important objective has been the implementation of the Minsk Agreement. Now, maintaining a sustaining dialogue is a prerequisite for fostering effective communication between stakeholders. Engaging in a dialogue between the European Union, Russia, and the Eastern Partnership, like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Belarus, would be highly beneficial from my point of view. By the way, one of the important documents I received today is the problem of the Global Security Initiative of China. They're important of this document because China is one of the pillars of the United Nations. If you look at it, in it, you see that it's speaking about territorial integrity of all countries, principles, respect of the principles of the United Nations Charter, and legitimate security, and also other peaceful resolving different problems between different countries. That's why it's very clear that China is one of the pillars. They are really fighting for this new world. Unilateral world is dying, and global security is burning as shell. You know, maintaining, trying to finalize my few words, I will say that the great philosopher, a statesman and a lawyer of ancient Rome, his name was Cicero. He said that a crooked peace is better than a just war. Personally, as a diplomat and professor of international law, I agree with Cicero. Of course, these days there are discussions, not military attacks. But although it seems difficult, I express my hope that the main actors will manage to sit formally down at the negotiation table and find solutions to end this conflict and move on a phase of reconstruction and finding ways to create a better and peaceful life. Sorry, it's okay. Okay, thank you very much. Once again, I was very happy to see, as Adrian Severin presented, and I wanted to prove to you, to send to you some of the ideas, and I hope very much that this kind of meetings by Zoom or by others, I think we can exchange a lot of interesting things and about our possibilities for the future of our humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Menescano. Once again, it was a privilege to benefit from your views. We really feel educated after your presentation. And now I would like to move our fourth speaker from Pakistan, Professor Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal. Professor Jaspal is a director and professor at the School of Politics and International Relations, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, where he teaches various aspects of global politics, nuclear studies, Pakistan's national security, hybrid warfare, and international politics. Professor Jaspal was also the director of the School of Politics and IR from October 2012 to January 2016, and a course coordinator at the Foreign Service Academy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Professor Jaspal has authored 3 books: Arms Control in South Asia, Politics, Postures, Practices, and India's Surgical Strike Stratagem, Brinkmanship and Responses, and Nuclear Risk Reduction Measures and Restraint Regime in South Asia. With this brief introduction, I would like to hand over the mic to Professor. He will be speaking on connectivity under Belt and Road Initiative. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Nabila Jafar. Indeed, it's a great honor and pleasure for me to be part of an academic discourse. And if you can see in this connectivity, I have been seeing Professor Rashid Ahmed Khan and 2 senior scholars who had already spoken, Adrian, and at the same time, the last one. And one of my friends, Dr. Falivius, is also part of this, and I think the organizer. So having said this opportunity, great opportunity for me to share on the issue, and that's why I'm very much grateful to IRS, Institute of Regional Studies, Islamabad, and Middle East Political and Economic Initiative, Bucharest. Now, if I can just start by saying that these 3 senior professors or experts, they try to give us what is happening at the global level, a competition between the Pax Americana versus Pax Senacia. This is happening. And when we try to see this with that reference, my 3 professors very correctly mentioned that the geopolitical trends revealing that we are inching towards geostrategic contest rather than or giving a way to geostrategic from geoeconomic. Now, when we look about these kind of the things, they create a lot of sort of developments and a lot of hope. So I'm not limiting, or you can say focusing on the geostrategic or what is happening at the geostrategic chessboard and the strategic competition. I'm limiting by these, I'm focusing during the next 10 to 15 minutes on the topic which has been assigned me, that is connectivity under Belt and Road Initiative. So if there is any question required, then I will go back. But starting with this, let me make it or re-emphasize, in the contemporary geopolitics, economic rather than military, leverage is more consequential in the pursuit of national interest. I agree that Russia's invasion in the Ukraine and increasing strategic competition between China and the United States reflects the Cold War-ish mentality, but Beijing's commitment with its Belt and Road Initiative and BRI's acceptability in the overwhelming states, more than 100 states, testifies that geoeconomics is consequential in the contemporary geopolitics. It's very interesting, and Professor Adrian has also mentioned this, and Professor Malesko. There is an interesting debate recently we witnessed under this rubric of Biden administration's slogan, the need to uphold a rules-based order. The recent Democracy Summit, which was convened, it was the second Democracy Summit convened by the Americans with a like-minded state. It was theoretically for what we call it, the need to uphold a rules-based order. But it's a politer manner, saying the United States is just. Trying to uphold the rules is a politer than saying its goal is to preserve United States primacy in perpetuity, weaken China permanently, topple governments it doesn't like, or undermines its other adversaries. Having said this, in this situation, we have seen that the Belt and Road Initiative has about to complete, or it has nearly completed a decade, a successful decade with its steady progress. President Xi has moved China into a new era by introducing this BRI vision in 2030. The operability of BRI establishes an intercontinental infrastructure network among the European, African, and Asian nations. It has a bilateral, regional, and international economic connectivity and implications. On May 15, 2017, Chinese President Xi said, and he tried to highlight it, BRI's aim. He said, we need to seek win-win results through greater openness and cooperation, avoid fragmentation for cooperation or pursuing exclusive arrangements, and reject protectionism. Now here, it's interesting that today when you see this chip controversy, containment policy, and reaction, that means that it is to spoil the connectivity. As we all know, that interdependency is the outcome of liberal international economic order, which we call it globalization, which is based on the win-win perception rather than zero-sum game. But the American policy or the Chinese assertiveness in certain areas sometimes generate doubts about it. Anyway, the BRI has two main prongs. One is called the Silk Road Economic Belt, one belt from China through Central Asia to Europe. And the other is 21st century Maritime Silk Road. There will be one road to connect China to Europe via the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. BRI's aim to revive ancient trading routes between Asia and Europe and build new links in the Middle East, Africa, and South America. The projects include pipelines, ports, railways, and other major infrastructure projects. These are the projects which qualify the topic which has been given to me, connectivity under the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI serves a range of China's core interests. These include the development of its more than 1.2 trillion blue economy, improving food and energy security, diversifying and securing sea lines of communication, upholding territorial sovereignty, and enhancing its international discourse power. BRI reduces the impact of disruptive forces on China's crucial supply chains and acts as a bulwark against China's economic or diplomatic isolation. Therefore, Beijing has been struggling to construct sustainable political and economic links with Central Asian republics, South Asian, and West Asian states or I can say, including Middle East. Importantly, all the Central Asian republics, Pakistan in South Asia, Iran in West Asia, as well now in Saudi Arabia, welcome BRI projects and receive generous financial support from China. BRI is a comprehensive initiative bridging an array of projects crafted to stream of goods and investment. Link between investment in trade infrastructure, foreign direct investment, and economic evolution is well-founded. Various networks such as interstate, transgovernmental, and transnational transactions that are connecting the societies at the global level. Project is causing uneasiness because it is a part of China's rising power, and it is considered as sustaining China's defense investment China's investment in the defense sector, or justifying or fulfilling the prophecy of the President Xi, what he said, the Chinas would be having a world-class armed forces by 2049. China, in the case of West Asia, which is or Middle East, China-Iran Strategic Cooperation Agreement will increase Beijing's influence in the region and create a conducive environment for Belt and Road Initiative. On March 27, 2021, the foreign ministers of China and Iran, Wang Yi and Javed Zarif, signed a momentous 25-year cooperation agreement in Tehran. It constitutes a long-term economic and security partnership for the Chinese 400 billion investment in exchange for a steady oil supply over 25 years. The deal could deepen China's influence in the Middle East and undercut America's efforts to keep Iran isolated. China-Iran strategic cooperation deal is not confined to the two countries. It would facilitate bolstering regional economic connectivity and provide opportunities to the neighboring countries, including Pakistan, to boost their economies and assist in diffusing geopolitical tensions in the Middle East by fostering a regional cooperative environment. Recently, on 10th March 2023, China played its role in establishing a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, ending a 8 years deadlock. Or this is a restarting of these two countries' diplomatic relations will be having a soothing impact on the regional cooperation. Yesterday, I read that Saudi Arabia has joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a dialogue partner. Iran is already there as an observer. Pakistan is there. And when we look about this kind of a soothing impact, Saudi Arabia is the leading country in GCC. And at the same time, this BRI, if it is moving and if there is a peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it is also assisting ECO country, Economic Cooperation Organization. If you can look from the Economic Cooperation Organization, these projects will be connecting Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, leading towards the Central Asia. So in a way, again, it's a good connectivity. Now here, this connectivity, of course, especially the Chinese connectivity with the Middle Eastern countries is advantageous and win-win for both sides. China imports half of its oil from the Middle East and is the top oil customer of Saudi Arabia and Iran. Definitely this connectivity and this rapprochement is in the advantage of China. The Middle East and North Africa region represents the cornerstone of the China's Belt and Road Initiative, accounting for 28.5% of its investment in 2021. Now, in this context, what we are hearing, on the one side, we are seeing that there is a connectivity. This is a good news for Pakistan as well, because from the Saudis and the Iranians rapprochement constituted by the Chinese, the third country which will be, or the fourth country which will be happy, it is Pakistan. Because Pakistan is a pivot for Central Asia, West Asia, and South Asia due to the BRI flagship project, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So how I can conclude? I submit that the BRI introduced a variable of a change in the current global geopolitical order, which comprises the United States' 3 decades global hegemony, commonly referred as a sole superpower stature. Simultaneously, BRI projects increased Beijing influence in the entire Asia, and it deepens or is deepening China's ties with the Middle Eastern state. This is a way, if you just see in the recent weeks, if anyone can see the literature which is produced or the news which has been produced by the American scholars or the Western analysts, they have been hammering one point or highlighting again and again one point. After 10th March 2023, that the Americans have been thrown out of the Middle Eastern power politics. Of course, it is there, we cannot ignore it, but that is a trend. So my final word is the connectivity under Belt and Road Initiative. It is on a very positive or upward trajectory. It is very much successful in the Central Asian republics, connecting what they call it Central Asian Corridor. It connected in the South Asia, Pakistan, of course, in the rest of South Asia, lesser. If you cannot buy the Americans' pearls of strings conceptualization, it has connected the, what we call it, seaports from Gwadar to Hambantota, moving towards Cook Island and all these kind of the things. So connectivity is there. Even in order to support this connectivity, Chinese have been very careful. If you see recently, they started building their port at Djibouti and increasing its influence in the Indian Ocean region. So by this way, the positive connectivity we witness in the Central Asia, there was a trade to Europe, and finally with Pakistan, and now we are looking towards netting with this BRI network, Middle Eastern countries, and certainly it will be a good news for these regions, and it is you can say, one can expect from this connectivity economic prosperity, political, you can say, issue settlement, and moving ahead with this international liberal economic order. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Jaspal, for sharing your perspective on BRI. Now we can open our Q&A session. We can have this opportunity of interaction of the participants with the speakers. Please raise your hand if you have questions, or write your questions in the inbox. I already have a few questions in the chat box. This is a question from Fatma. She wants to know, she wants to ask Professor Rashid that concerning aid in cyber domain and in terms of technology to Israel from USA, how we see USA's interest in the Middle East. Can we consider that China's interest in the Middle East enhanced to overcome ongoing influence of USA in the Middle East? This is a question from Fatma, and this is directed to Professor Rashid.
Thank you for this question. In fact, Chinese policy towards the Middle East never aimed at excluding its relationship with Israel. And I think the nexus between, as has developed, United States, Israel, and India, that has alarmed Beijing. And that is why, in one way, I perceive the recent engagement of China, political engagement of China from with the conclusion of agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran is a response to what has been called Indo-Pacific Plan by the United States, in which not only India, but Israel is also a very important partner of the United States. So in my view, if I have understood your question correctly, the growing nexus between with Israel by with India and the United States, that was aimed at putting pressure on China to from the Middle East, from a Western flank that constitutes Middle East, because any development in the Middle East can affect Western China to weaken its Western flank, and this is a counter move by China to enter into the political arena of the Middle East. You know, for about a decade or more, the Chinese remained disengaged with the Middle East politically. They engaged only economically. Now they have moved in the political arena. And this is a response, a strategic response by China to the pressure being exerted by the United States in collaboration with India in the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific region, and in the Middle East with Israel.
Thank you, Professor Rashid. As I don't see any raised hand right now, so before that, I would like to invite Dr. Flavius Kaba-Maria, President
there is a question from Mohammad Zarek to everyone.
Sir, we can take these questions later. Okay. First, I would like to give this floor to Professor, to Dr. Flavius Kaba-Maria. He is the president of MEPEI, Bucharest. He will be speaking on the Energy Cooperation and China's Global Security Initiative. We will take further questions after this presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to have this presentation. I have also a PowerPoint presentation, and I try to share with you PowerPoint. Just a second. My presentation will have 3 main points. The first one will be about China strengthening ties with the Middle East country. The second is energy cooperation and economic nexus. And finally, I have short a few thoughts on global security initiative. Already Professor Meleshkanu presented an extensive overview of this initiative. Related to the first first main point is China strengthened ties with the Middle East country. I would like to say that China mediation of Saudi-Iran normalization agreement signals a potential movement from its long-standing policy of keeping to a minimal and economic-oriented regional footprint to engage with diplomacy to negotiated conflict resolution. By successfully bringing two of the Middle East rivals to the negotiation tables, China aims to build credibility as a capable partner in a region that facing American security disengagement and strategic neglected. Economically speaking, the Middle East has long embraced Beijing, and historically, China has stayed away from involvement in conflicts or taking a direct position on disputes. On these slides, I like to show you that the four main measures that China use in relation with the Middle East country, and the only things that I would like to present the mediation pattern used by Chinese, that is eager to participate rather than dominate, to follow rather than lead, and to put forward constructive ideas rather than set agendas, and to pursue de-escalation rather than all-out resolution in complicated words. That is needed to understand what happening during this mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Going a little bit forward on this slide, I would like only to focus on that China has a multipolar order in the Middle East, and they, in their diplomatic rhetoric, they have a distinction interpretation between intervention and interference. And of course, the principle of non-intervention and develop of a Chinese approach of limited intervention and making the distinction with creative involvement. That could serve Beijing in spending global role and interest better. On the other things that promote China in the Middle East is they promote the concept of developmental peace in contrast to the Western concept of democratic peace in the whole MENA region. Moving to one of the most important topics from China in the Middle East is energy engagement and also economic cooperation. I would like to stress that after 1949, Chinese primarily see this region as a revolutionary ideology, and after that, Deng Xiaoping policy and changing the approaching and driven mainly by energy and commercial interests. Currently, as we notice, there is a potential movement to the negotiation conflict resolution, even though that economic and energy issues still there. China's huge energy demand is naturally at the core of the trade relationship with the Middle East countries. The Middle East, as we notice, is the largest oil supplier of oil and gas to China, as also Professor Jaspal mentioned. We can notice in which year Chinese became the largest oil importer from the Middle East. And in particular, the region accounts for nearly half of the Chinese oil imports, making it vital to Beijing energy security. Also, other speakers mentioned this, but this is a very important in establishing also global security initiative. You will see a little bit later on. I would like to say that dedicated to this cooperation on energy sector, Chinese established or published in 2016, at the beginning of 2016, China Arab policy paper that presented a very clear mechanism of cooperation between China and Arab countries. That 1+2+3 cooperation pattern. You can see on the slide what means each of that figures. And on the same year, after publication, this paper was that visit, very important visit or historical visit by President Xi Jinping in Egypt, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. This is one of the first steps, I would like to say, at the beginning of establishing that very strategic and comprehensive partnership between that countries and China. In 2017, there is a very important issue that investment with Arab countries reached 33 billion. That is also very new steps in their development relationship. And I would like to stress here only that Chinese is also engaged in post-war reconstruction project in Iraq, but also they are looking also different opportunities in Lebanon, Libya, Sudan, and currently Syria. Syria was also accepted as a part of Belt and Road Initiative. Moving a little bit further, this is one of the most important changing in the relationship between China and Middle East. Is the firstly, I would like to mention 25 years China-Iran strategic agreement. And after that, last year, 27 years China-Qatar LNG agreement. And in December last year, from my point of view, there is a huge shift in the international relations in the Middle East and dealing with Chinese. There were 3 summits: China-Saudi Arabia Summit, China-GCC Summit, and first China-Arab State Summit. On that time, there is very important Riyadh Declaration, when through the Riyadh Declaration, China and Arab community stated that would like to extend and expand their cooperation in different fields, not only in energy and other fields, in order to diversify their economy. And on the same time, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs published a report on Sino-Arab cooperation in New Era. Here, I would like also to mention there is a 3 major issues that should be noticed here. That yuan is one of the most important element in rivalization as a dollar in the Middle East. You can say Chinese promote as a its own currency, yuan, in trade exchange with the majority country in the BRICS frameworks, but also with many of the MENA countries. Other issue is that related to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Iran established to get or receive the approval to be as a full membership in September 2022. And maybe this year in 2023, we'll have Iran as a full membership in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the latest news is that Saudi Arabia yesterday decided also to apply as a membership in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Already my previously speakers mentioned about the BRICS, and that's what is focus for us is Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey. They are going also to be part of the BRICS. We'll see in the very near future. What I would like here also to stress that over the years, Gulf cooperation countries have been at the forefront of Beijing foreign policy priority, as China plans to bolster its energy security. And the vast majority of GCC countries are overly dependent on oil revenues. By partnering with Beijing, GCC countries can diversify their economy and attract foreign direct investment. Hence, the Arab countries desire to expand cooperation with China on technology transfer, infrastructure development, and renewable energy. Unlike the polarization attitude of the United States in the region, Beijing has been able to establish smooth diplomatic ties with many Middle East countries by focusing on win-win understanding and a non-intervention attitude. Moving forward with my presentation, because of the sake of the time, here on this slide, I presented Chinese investment in the Gulf cooperation region on two periods: before establishing Belt and Road Initiative and during Belt and Road Initiative until 2019, because after 2019, there is a different approaches to the statistics. And also here, you can see also the importance of MENA for Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Moving forward to the current situation, I would like to stress that China tops the list of the largest partner in the Arab world in trade exchange and is among the 3 largest trading partners of each Arab country separately. Meanwhile, Middle East trade with the US has declined. You can see on the slide what is the figures and the values of trades, exchange, and Chinese investment in Arab countries. Going forward, on this slide, China continued to develop its economic ties across regional, strengthening its position as the largest trading partner to regional powers such as Egypt, Iran, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Emirates. And on the slide is written very precisely what is the rank and important export with that countries from the MENA region. Going forward, this is a very new statistic. That China is expanding its footprint in the Middle East to meet its vast energy needs in 2023. And Russia overtook Saudi Arabia to be China's top oil supplier in the first 2 months of this year. In January and February, Russia exported roughly 1.9 million barrels per day, more than last year on the same period when it was 1.6 million barrels per day. Russia, in that case, last year was China's second largest crude oil supplier. In January and February, Saudi exported roughly 1.7 million barrels per day, decreasing from 1.8 million barrels per day a year earlier. Saudi Arabia was China's top supplier last year. However, these changes was made by domestic fuel demand of China rising following the lifting of COVID-19 restriction and benefit the European Union embargo on Russia oil based on the sanctions. Chinese refinery also use intermediary traders to handle shipping and insurance of Russian crude oil to avoid violating Western sanctions. Here, what is very important that if you notice on the slide and Malaysia, you can see there is a huge increase in exporter. I would like to say roughly 150% from the same period in last year. Why? Because Malaysia is often used as an intermediary point for sanctioned cargoes from Iran and Venezuela. On this slide, in 2000, this slide is dedicated to the gas. In 2021, China imported more LNG than any other country. You can see on this slide from the Middle East or GCC countries, Qatar is on the first place. LNG imports account for more than half of China overall natural gas imports and 30% of China top natural gas supply in 2021. Now, very shortly, for the sake of the time, maybe not more than a few minutes, about global security initiative, that is to answer also maybe a few questions. For sure, the security of the Middle East is important for the world stability. This is all consensus. And the MENA region is going through this massive changes, shifting alliance and partnership. In order to solve the global dominance issue and to stabilize the region, Chinese established a new initiative. This initiative called Global Security was firstly proposed at the Bao Forum for Asia Annual Conference. This is I would like to say from Western side, similar to Davos. In April last year, as I mentioned. This year in February, Minister of Foreign Affairs of China presented the concept paper of Global Security Initiative. There are 4 major points in China in order to implement this initiative and fostering a new security architecture in the Middle East. That is written on the slide. I do not want to go through them. What is dedicated on this global security paper towards the Middle East, because they, of course, encompasses the whole region, the other region, also ASEAN, Africa, and Latin America, and the other parts of the world. but dedicated to the Middle East. There is very clear written that support the Arab League and other regional organizations as a Chinese this initiative support, and also advance the two-state solution to the Palestinian question. And the last major issue is that Chinese established the Middle East Security Forum. Last year was the second forum dedicated to analyzing the security architecture in the Middle East, happening in September last year. In that time, I had the chance to participate in that forum. Moving a little bit forward, because one of my colleagues also presented, also Professor Josh Pal particularly presented certain things about straits and choke points and how it's moving in energy flows in the area of Persian Gulf. I would like to say here, one of the major interests of China in signing this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran is to maintain its own flow of energy, particularly oil and gas, through a Strait of Hormuz. After that, using very easily port of Gwadar and Pakistan-China economic corridor to enter in China in order to avoid Strait of Malacca, as Professor Rashid already mentioned. And the other major point in this agreement is that China would like also to have as a freedom of movement to use the corridor, south-north corridor, in order to access Caspian Sea. In that case, they would like also to avoid the Strait Bab-el-Mandeb and Suez Canal. So having all that country, GCC countries and Iran, and particularly Gulf countries in China sphere of interest, there is serves in order to project their own diplomacy or their own as economically, but maybe a little bit later on the political aspects that Beijing interest in that region. So I would like also to conclude my presentation, being open to answer the question. This is a short conclusion. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present few thoughts about China engaging in the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flavius, for this enriching presentation. You supported all your arguments with statistics. Thank you so much. We are already on time, but before giving the floor for the concluding remarks, I would like to ask one more question, which is already in the chat room. This question, Mohammed Zirik has this question. Could China's recent surge in the Middle East be viewed as a strategic move in response to the United States' considerable military presence in the South China Sea and ongoing tensions over the issue of Taiwan? This any speaker can respond to this question.
May I?
Yes, sure.
Well, I think I should answer this question. I have already answered this question partly, saying that Chinese decision to engage particularly with the countries of the Middle East and also to participate in some measure in the security plans in the area is a response to the developments in the Asia Pacific, in the Southeast Asia, in the Indian Ocean, in Southeast Asia, and also in the Pacific region. We know that the United States has roved in India along with Australia and Japan in what is known as Quad, and that is aimed at what many observers say containment of China, and that is I think taken by the Chinese as a provocative movement, A recent, not so recent decision by the United States to set up AUKUS, Australia, UK, and United States alliance, in which for the first time nuclear submarines are going to be introduced in the Pacific region. Then we all also know that the United States is working, spending extra energy on working to wean the smaller island states of the Pacific region away from China. Although these smaller countries have invited China on their invitation. China has invested in these countries. China has financed the development projects in these countries, but the United States has become alarmed about on the growing relationship between China and the smaller countries of the Pacific region. And thirdly, the decision to change the name to make a change from Indo-Pacific to Indo-Asian, Asia-Pacific into Indo-Pacific concept. That has also irked China, and China has publicly denounced that move as an anti-China move in the Indian Ocean. And most importantly, the nexus being created with India, Israel, and the United States and the Middle East to increase their presence in the Red Sea area. That is also a provocative move by these countries against China, which the China has responded. You will remember that recently, just a few days ago, joint military exercises by Russia, China, and Iran were held in Gulf Oman. And in the near future, I can foresee that these joint military exercises, naval exercises, would be joined by other states of the region, maybe Pakistan. So these are the moves which are being made by China, of course, to lessen the pressure of the United States on China in Southeast Asia, in the South China Sea, in the Pacific region, and put pressure on an area which of course is of strategic significance for China, but more important for the defense and security of the European countries and America. That is to say that these areas, the Middle East, right from the Mediterranean to the Malacca states, this is the traditional area of Western influence, not only American influence, but Western influence.
Thank you, Professor Rashid. We got your point of view. Now I would like to ask other distinguished panelists. Would you like Professor Andrian to respond to the same question?
Yes, I will be very brief because the time is short. I would say that I see the things the other way around. I think that it is not the response of China to the United States considerable military presence in the South China Sea, but this presence is a response of the raising of China's influence in areas where before that United States was the dominant power. So what we saw, and it is very spectacular in the last weeks or months, in terms of results of the mediation of China in the Middle East, is something which is a result of a long time project. China for a long time is trying to do these things. These are not things which could be achieved overnight, and this trend was certainly noticed by United States, and therefore they are trying this approach of appeasing China and containing China. And I think that, and I end with that, I think that this is a precisely the other way around, the reaction of United States to the raising of Chinese power, which started quite a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Andrea. Now, I would like to ask Professor Meliscano. Would you like to respond to the same question?
Yes, I can also look at this, at what is happening. It's not only when we speak about China, it's not only China, is Asia is the most important pillar of it. And if you look at Asia this year, you realize that this continent from the Asian party, and also you realize that they have resources, they have labor moves, and they have the possibility to have to develop things which are really very important for the humanity as the world. That's why what I think to say is that from my point of view, the European Union should be much more interested and looking at the Asia, because this is the future of our countries, and this is the only one outlet from these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Meliscano. I can see a hand raised from a research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies, Mr. Imran Sardar. He has a question.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief because time is very short. I just want to ask very brief questions that I just wanted to know that with increasing ties, the deepening ties with the China's, with the Middle Eastern countries, don't you think there would be a more asymmetric interdependence in the region, mostly favoring in China?
I would like to give the opportunity to Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, because he'll be leaving in a short while.
I think that with the increasing ties with the China, when you look about it, of course, it increased interdependency. And it's China is already dependent on the Middle Eastern oil. If you see the Chinese Strait of Malacca, which we call it Malacca Dalima, that was linked with that, and its merchandise going to Middle East. And now when this connectivity will start, and these countries are dependent on the China, this interdependency, which was earlier in balance was in those countries, now it will be shifted in the Chinese favor. So it will be not asymmetrical, it would be some kind of a balancing sort of a thing. Of course, Chinese have been investment, especially when you go to the Middle Eastern poor countries in a MENA, there that investment make those countries more dependent on the China as compared to the other. Or that's the reason that the Americans have been, you can say, debating this debt trap. So these kind of these slogans you would hear because of the Chinese investment in the lesser developed countries there. But however, there will be a balancing sort of a thing. Similarly, if you see on Iran, 25 out of 400, 2,500 will be going to this, what you call it, no, I mean, just 2,500 going to be in the hands of the oil, which China import, and remaining is the infrastructure. So this is the way there's an arrangement. But a little bit, I would like to touch earlier question also, in which it was, yes, China is sensitive about the Taiwan, and in the case of South China Sea, China has shown its assertiveness with its military might. And if you see that there was a speech by the President Xi in which he said that if anybody going to violate, they were going to hitting the iron wall and their heads will be broken. This was a very categorical, a military threatening speech when he made from the South China Sea base. But in the case of Middle East, it's very interesting because United States has an interest there, but not like this, like China has a linkages with the Taiwan. But on the Israel case, one can say Biden administration or United States is sensitive, but China has a good relations with the Israel. I was seeing an article in the American journal in which they were saying that this rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, it will bring a peace in the MENA or in the Middle East. It will be going to have an advantage or lessen the tension between the Israel and its neighboring Arab world as well. So these are the perceptions. So even if the Americans are moving, and if you see that America started moving deliberately out of the Middle East with the rebalancing strategy, which is called it pivot strategy in 2011, 2012. So these are I think it cannot be comparable with the Chinese sensitivity over the Taiwan, the way the Americans are losing their grip in the Middle East. Thank you. I have to leave. Thank you very much because I had.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaspal. Thank you. We are really grateful. Yeah. Professor Andrian, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, I would like to answer a question which is on the chat. It's written on the chat, and I will at least a part of it, because there are 3 questions. Mr. Hirasawar put the question, or Mrs. How is China addressing the challenges of human rights and democracy in the engagement with the Middle East? And what are the implications for regional stability and global governance? This was a question. And my answer is the following. China thinks that human rights and democracy are not a unique, universal, and centralized set of values. It is about diversity. This is the opinion of China. It is a matter for each nation to organize itself according to its tradition, to its culture. And I would add my wish as a former rapporteur of United Nations Council of Human Rights, who experienced that diversity, and I had to adjust the mentalities of a unique center for defining the human rights. I think that our best desire and our best hope should be that we all would move along the convergent lines, but we cannot say that we have a single set of rules for democracy and a single set of rules for human rights. And this is the new, I would say, the new offer of China. Not only China has this mentality, but I think that once China will express itself as a power, as a global power, as a regional power, I believe that it will leave to each country to solve the issues of human rights and democracy, and thereafter, and by that, it will avoid something which we have experienced in the last decades, let's say, and this is to transform the issue of human rights from a target into a means to move ahead geopolitical agendas. Many times we saw that human rights were not, invoked and used in order to make the life of the people better, but it was used in order to promote some geopolitical interest of some countries. And I think that a new order should change this approach. Thank you.
Sir Andrian, I would like to ask the permission of Ambassador Rifat Masood. If she allows me, I will take a few minutes more to ask the 2 more questions. Can you hear me, Ambassador Rifat? Okay, I'll manage. There is another question in the thread by Hera Server. And this question is more relevant to Dr. Flavius. What is the impact of China's increasing cultural exchanges in the Middle East, and how are they shaping perceptions and attitudes in both regions?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Maybe you mentioned very clearly this culture, but I would like also to focus on the third part of that question and coming back to the culture exchange, because maybe they are interlinked. how does China growing military presence in the Middle East affect the regional security balance and how they impact the global balance of power. What I would like also to stress that China has a consistent position in this region. That is should be very clear. China support the regional countries to solve their differences through dialogue. And China seeks closer relations with some countries in the region and seeks decent relation with some other countries. That China approaches is different from the West, and it has maintained pretty good relation with all the countries in the region. What is also we notice in the last period of time, China emphasis that the GCC member countries and Iran are neighbors, and they should engage with each other more frankly. They are all friends of China and all of value to China. What is needed, as who raised this question related to regional security balance, there is needed to establish architecture or security architecture in the Persian Gulf. After the Iraq-Iran war was not that kind of architecture established in Persian Gulf. So this could be a first step in order to China to engage, in order to promote a security multilateral plan in order to engage regional powers to solve themselves that engagement in Persian Gulf. And related to global balance of power, I don't think so there will be notice a very huge shift. US, of course, is disengagement from Middle East in a certain way, but he is not fully, but US not fully leave Middle East. US will keep their own military bases in the most important partners from the Middle East, or especially in the Gulf countries. So that is, I think, very clear to say China is not going to engage in or to support one country against another country. Related to the culture, of course, there is a diplomacy in China. They started to strengthen ties, for example, with different countries, particularly Egypt, Saudi Arabia, for example, when the Chinese is already teaching in the university, and other countries establish different culture centers as Confucius centers in their own country, even though Lebanon and other countries. So in the terms of culture, they are increasing in exchange of students and research between MENA countries and China. So I think also related to the values, China prefer that country where there are stabilized country, when there are strong leaders, particularly Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey, Egypt. We can mention also here Egypt and Emirates, and of course Qatar and others, where we have a very, very clear stabilized government or regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Flavius. We have two more questions. I would club them together. There's a question by Hira, and it is: how does China's growing military presence in the Middle East affect the regional security balance, and how do they impact the global balance of power? And there is another question by Zina Nawaz. How can China's energy partnerships with Middle Eastern countries affect European energy security and supply chains? Ambassador Meleskenu, would you like to? Ambassador Meleskenu, can you unmute yourself?
Now I am on mute. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words, because these discussions are very, very important. From a point of view, when we speak about the China coming to Europe, it is very clear. It's not only the energy systems. It's also the development of the countries in this period of CAIF. And for China, the most important thing is to have peace and real competition without any pressures from outside. That's why I think it's more than Asia. It is covering the Middle East. And Middle East, yes, it's one of the key issues. It is very connected with the European countries, and also they are very connected with Asia. The problem is very simple. If there is peace and normal development of the countries, I think there will be a huge boulevard from China to the European Union on different issues. We can do it. We have to be more important, more preoccupied for the relations with the Asia. And also sometimes I think that there are some countries which are not yet in a very in the first place. I'm speaking about Vietnam, for example, which has a good relationship with the European countries and others. And we have to use the best of our possibilities to really create a very normal economic, not only on defense only, but also on the economy and the development of all these countries, and then this pronunciation, practically the idea of President Xi, it is very clear for this problem.
May I add the word?
Yes, yes. I was coming toward you. Yeah, sure.
Very quickly on the issue concerning the European energy security and supply chains and so on, vis-a-vis or as a result of China's, energy partnerships with Middle East. I think that Europe, I just want to add two sentences. Number one, Europe is more dependent on the Chinese market and on the Chinese relations, economic and trade relations than the United States and perhaps than many others. Everything in the future will depend on the decision of the European Union to treat China as a partner or as a rival. If we are following the way of rivalry, indeed, whatever China is doing in the Middle East will play against the European Union and will make problems to the European Union. If we treat China as a partner, then I think that the involvement of China in the Middle East from the energy and generally speaking economic point of view will play in favor of the European Union. So this is very briefly something which I wanted to add. Thank you so much.
We are already ahead of time, so that is why I would move to, thank you so much all the panelists. I would move to the concluding remarks by Ambassador Rifat Masood. Ambassador Rifat Masood is a career diplomat. She was Pakistan's first woman ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran from 2018 to 2019. And she is an honor graduate of University of Sheffield from United Kingdom. And Ambassador Masood joined the Foreign Service of Pakistan in July 1987. During her service, Ambassador Rifat Masood undertook the National Security and War course at the National Defense University, Islamabad. And in her capacity as Director of Personnel, she also headed the first for the Clintondale training program for young diplomats at The Hague, Netherlands in 2004. And she has served in various capitals as Pakistan's diplomat. I will not go into much details from her credentials because of the shortage of time. Ambassador Rifat Masood, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Nabila.
Over to you, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon to our friends in Bucharest and from a cold, windy Islamabad. I'm sure it's even colder in Bucharest. I must say this was a very, very enlightening, very productive, and very intense 2 hours, more than 2 hours of discussions on China's role in the Middle East and Asia, and its growing, its deepening ties with the countries in our region. I must thank Ambassador Nadeem Riaz and Dr. Flavius for this initiative. A virtual conference is always much easier to handle, I think, in a way, because we can talk across continents, across time zones, and talk at ease, given that we don't have to travel long distances. And I must congratulate both these institutes also for having a partnership in intellectual and academic discussions on various global and regional issues. Now, I have been very carefully listening to everyone who has spoken and also the questions that have been asked and answered very, very well, and with a lot of thought has gone into this entire exercise. And in conclusion, I'd just like to say a few things. I know that we are short of time, but I must point out a couple of things that perhaps already many of the people living in our region know and experience, but especially for my European friends. You see, what we see today happening is basically a West versus China scenario. Professor Zafar Jaspal referred to a Cold War-ish kind of a situation. I wouldn't go as far as that, perhaps, but we do see two major camps emerging. We have the West with its history of colonialism in this region, and it's a very bitter history. It's an unpopular history. It is something which has led to many in the region, both in Asia, Great Asia, as well as Middle East and Africa, to be suspicious of anything coming from the West or the United States or Europe. So therefore, because of this history of colonialism, China's policy, China's approach towards economic engagement, China's approach towards building trade and economic interdependencies and a non-kind of interference in political disputes up until now, that was a very good alternative given to countries in our region. And especially those countries that have that are still in some form of conflict, which has been the remnant of colonialism. Of course, I'm referring to the conflict in the Middle East. I'm also referring to conflicts in Africa. I'm also referring to conflicts in my own region in South Asia. So therefore, China's approach to engage economically has been a welcome one. Now, that does not, however, mean that China will just stick to economic development and economic growth and trade and investment. Of course, the cornerstone of Chinese policy is peace and non-interference and protection of its own economic interests. And in that, of course, the talk given by Dr. Jaspal was very enlightening, especially for regarding the BRI, because the BRI is the flagship of China's policy in for the next few decades. But as a precursor to the BRI, China has been building all this up. Its engagement with the Middle East went as far back as Dr. Flavius pointed out, to 2004 when the Arab paper was published, and how they started their dependency on importing oil from the Middle East because to feed its own economy. Don't forget, China is still an energy I wouldn't say an energy-starved nation, but a nation that really requires a lot of energy to feed its economy, to feed its growing infrastructure and its industrialization. And therefore, it is dependent on oil from Iran and the Middle East and the Gulf countries especially, as well as expanding into Africa and Middle East and Asia to build infrastructure there and develop connectivity so that there could be an easy flow of that oil, which is necessary for its own growth. So you see, it's a win-win situation for both sides. And that is one thing which endears China to many of these countries, as opposed to the approach that the United States and the West has been, Europe has been taking in the past. And I couldn't agree more with Dr. Severin and Professor Ambassador Meliscano that we have a history whereby the US is now being seen as losing its influence to a great extent in this region. Although the grip is still there, don't forget, Israel is the closest partner to the United States in this region, and protection of Israel's interests are very important to the United States. But at the same time, because of the growing influence of China, which is in fact strengthening and empowering these nations, these countries are also understanding their own worth and their own writ, and they're trying to expand, move away from a dependency, a total dependency, which we had historically on the United States and the West, to more engagement with China. This, the United States also sees. It should be disturbing to the United States because, and it should give them an opportunity to, in fact, introspect and to see that the kind of policies that they have been practicing in this region have only led to more polarization, whereas China's policy has been totally different. And I think that it would be safe to conclude that when it comes to any kind of engagement that China has with any country, whether it is the countries in its neighborhood, or whether it is in the Middle East or Africa, or even in Europe, it is always based on economic engagement. That's the soft power that China has always used, and it has been successful in that. Now that China has been able to establish its credentials in this region, because it has shown that it is dependent on Gulf and Middle Eastern oil, it is dependent on the strategic location of these countries through, as speakers before have been pointing out, the importance of the Straits of Hormuz, the importance of the Caspian Sea, the importance of the Suez Canal, how these interconnectivities are important to China. So China has been able to convince these countries that, look, I need you and you need me. So instead of having a kind of rivalry, instead of trying to go into territories, let's try to have this kind of economic engagement, which is fruitful to all of us. And that has been very, very successful. And I think that will continue. Now, when it comes to Iran, I think this is a breakthrough. Now, the global initiative that many speakers before have pointed out, and I think that is very, very important, the global initiative that it has launched just last year, it shows that China is now, after having established its foothold in this region, economically, culturally, even militarily, because don't forget, Saudi Arabia is receiving a lot of weapons and ballistic technology from China, as is Egypt, as are other countries in the region. So it is also providing military hardware, but not as much as the West would do. However, now that it has established its credentials as an economic partner, as a very reliable economic partner, now it is expanding into the more strategic, the more security-related issues. And that too, the argument from China's perspective is that it needs stability in the Middle East, it needs stability in South Asia, it needs stability in Africa and West Asia in order to protect its own economic interests. As I said, the BRI, which is the flagship of China's economic growth and development, it needs to be sustained. And the only way it can be sustained, because it is running through a region which is volatile. Therefore, the only way to sustain that and to make sure that it is successful is to have peace in that region. And China's argument has been, and is working so far, is to ascertain this peace through economic dependencies, not through going in through the old method of military and hard power, but through soft power. And I think all the speakers, I must say, have elaborated on all these aspects that I have just touched upon very, very well. On the Global Security Initiative, both Dr. Flavius and Dr. Severin, as well as Professor Maniscalco, have spoken about it. On the historical perspective, Dr. Rashid has elaborated very well on how important this region has been historically for China as well. And I must, at the end, I must say that, you know, we do see, I think it was Dr. Severin who was talking, or Professor Maniscalco was talking about a new order. I do see the emergence of a new order coming about. I see maybe not a Cold War where there are two camps, but I see more multipolarity coming out. I see US power diminishing to a certain extent, but not as much as maybe other people feel, because as Dr. Flavius did point out, the US will keep its foothold in the Middle East for strategic and for security reasons where it is important. It will continue to provide the military hardware necessary. But we do see the emergence of China taking a place at the high table of security and strategic cooperation, not just economic. They are moving beyond economy now. They are moving more into the security realm, and the partnership that it has with Iran, the 25-year strategic partnership that it has got, in which it has invested a lot of money, $400 billion. The brokering of a rapprochement between two historical rivals, Saudi Arabia and Iran, has been a huge success. And I think that if we are able to sustain it, if both countries are able to sustain it through China's efforts, as well as the efforts of their neighbors, it will be a game changer in this region. And I think for Pakistan, it will be very, very useful, because Pakistan has got very close relations with all three countries. We are a very steadfast friend of China, but we are also very close friends with Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it was harming our relations. Our position was being compromised many times, and we had to work very, very deftly as diplomats to ensure a balance between Iran and Saudi Arabia, because both countries are very important to us. But now that the two countries are mending fences, this will go a long way in making it easy for Pakistan also to engage fruitfully with all three countries. And I'm sure that the next few decades that we see more an increasing role of China, not through necessarily military or through a more shall I say, hardware kind of a relationship, but more soft and economic, but also security-based. So I would once again like to thank all the speakers. I'd like to especially thank the Institute of Regional Studies, as well as the Middle East and Political Institute in Bucharest, Dr. Flavius and Ambassador Imran and Nadeem Riaz, for the initiative that you have undertaken. And I hope to see more of such initiatives. An exchange between academics and intellectuals is always beneficial, especially to practicing diplomats. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rifat Masood. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and summing up and concluding the discussion very aptly. Thanks. I want to thank all the distinguished panelists. It was really a very productive and enriching discussion. In the end, I would like to give mic to the President of IRS and President of MEPEI, Dr. Flavius, for the final vote of thanks.
Thank you, Nabila. It was really a very fascinating discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So many points of views, very well expressed ideas. And Ambassador Rifat, you did a lovely conclusion to 2 hours of, I think over 2 hours of intense discussions. I think it was one of the best webinars we've had. And I keenly look forward to future engagements with MEPEI, because I think we can really have a very open-ended discussion, I think, which is extremely important, because then you get so much from it. My compliments to all the speakers. My compliments to Nabila for organizing all this, and thank you everyone from my side.
I would like also to thank you very much to all the speakers and participants attendees engaging in our first bilateral talks. And at the end, I would like to thank also a lot President of Institute of Regional Study, Ambassador Nadim Riaz, for organizing this first roundtable or virtual roundtable that very needed in order to enhance our ties, Pakistani-Romanian ties, on different global issues, particularly Middle East issue. As we notice today, China, one of the most important actors in the world, we covered more than 2 hours, but I think it's needed also more discussion on China engaging, especially on our area of interest, Middle East. There are a lot of other dimensions in order to discuss more, as we didn't touch too much about military presence on other security development of China in the Middle East, but there is could be another discussion. Based on our program, also together with the Institute of Regional Studies, we'd like also to have in the near future and other webinars focusing on the other very important issue. One of that issue could be as the impact of Iran and Saudi agreement in the Middle East. That will be very timely also during these times. After 1 month, we'll maybe see a new development on this relationship, and in the certain after few, I do not know when we'll establish our based on our program to have a new webinar in order to talk more on that issue. And another topics of our common interest is the increase of competition in the Indian Ocean. Another one, future scenario in Afghanistan. We are based on Pakistani experience and Pakistani knowledge about the Afghanistan issue in order to enlighten us what's going on in Afghanistan. And the four topics could be key challenges facing South Asia or global South. So we have a few topics on our agenda for the near future. I would like also to invite all of you to participate, also to engage, even though as the speakers, even though as the attendees in our next discussion. Thank you very much, Nabila, for moderating the whole roundtable. Thank you very much also again for all of you being present and contributing to our first bilateral discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Now, this is the time to say goodbye and have a great day. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Nabila.